snow biting her cheeks, knees sinking into drift, arms trembling as she lifts the child toward the stranger's chest. Her last warmth leaving with him, his coat absorbing the weight without a word, wind clawing, his breath steady, her voice barely ash. Please, just keep her alive. And now, listen close. If you want to hear how this desperate mother found salvation, stay until the very end. Snow hammered the world into silence. Wind clutched her coat, turning the edges into knives that bit through wool and skin alike. Her breath came thin and ragged, each exhale torn away before it could warm her lips. She staggered over the last drift, legs folding beneath her as the cabin lantern flickered like a distant star. The child in her arms whimpered once, then went still. For a heartbeat, she thought that stillness meant the end. She pressed her cheek to the little one's face, searching for a warmth. Barely there, barely human, a fading ember in a world made of ice. She crawled the final feet, fingers numb, knees burning, vision tunneling into darkness as the lantern swayed. She raised her fist to knock, but it fell limp against the door. The wood opened anyway. He stood there, broad shoulders filling the doorway, coat dusted with frost, eyes steady and unreadable. Heat spilled out around him, brushing her like a memory of summer. She tried to speak. A sound like cracked paper left her throat. She lifted the child toward him, arms shaking under the weight she no longer had strength to carry. The moment he took that weight, her body slumped forward, as if surrendering was all it had been waiting for. He didn't ask questions. He simply turned and carried the child inside, holding her with the kind of care that didn't need words. Warmth pushed against her face as she crawled across the threshold. Firelight danced in the corner, melting the edges of her vision. The door closed. Wind silenced. Her body collapsed onto the floorboards, the cold peeling away from her bones inch by inch. She heard his boots cross the room, heard the soft rustle of blankets, heard the slow, steady breath of the man who had taken responsibility without being asked. Then, faintly, the child coughed. A small sound. A living sound. She sobbed, quiet and raw, relief shaking through muscles that could no longer hold anything. He knelt beside her and lifted her by the shoulders, guiding her toward the fire. Not gently, not harshly, practically, as though saving lives was something a person simply does. He set a tin cup near her hands. Steam drifted upward, fragrant and warm, carrying the promise that the night would not swallow them whole. Still, he said nothing. Not a single word. But his presence filled the room like a vow. She looked up at him, this stranger, this silent wall of warmth, and understood she had crossed her last frozen mile. And that for the first time in a very long time, she might live until morning. Dawn crawled slow across the frost-bitten window, its pale light barely reaching the far corner of the cabin. She woke to warmth she didn't trust. Heat on her face, soft wool under her cheek, a low crackle from the fire that sounded almost like breathing. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that she wasn't freezing, and that startled her more than the cold ever had. A cough from the cot beside her pulled her fully awake. Her child, curled under a heavy quilt, face flushed with life instead of blue-tinged stillness, tiny fingers twitching against the fabric, searching for comfort. She reached out, stopped herself, fingers trembling in mid-air, unsure they had the right to touch anything warm. Across the room, he moved. The rancher, already awake, already working, boots planted by the stove, hands steady as he set a pot of water to heat, his breath slow, his presence quiet but filling every inch of the space. He glanced at her once, just once, acknowledging she was alive, then returned to his task. The warmth from the stove radiated outward, slow, gentle, as if the room itself sighed. She pushed herself to sit, muscles fluttering, head swimming. the memory of cold still clinging to her skin like frost that would melt. He noticed, not by looking at her, but by the way her breath shivered. He took a mug from the shelf, poured hot water over dried herbs, set it on the table closest to her. No words. But the steam drifting from the cup reached her before his hand withdrew, wrapping her in a sweetness she couldn't swallow yet. Outside, wind scraped at the eaves, a reminder that the world beyond the door hadn't softened. Not for her. Not for the child. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, the words dissolving in the warm air. He gave a short nod. Nothing more. The dog wandered over, an old cattle dog with cloudy eyes and a gait shaped by years of loyalty. It paused before her, sniffed the air, then pressed its head gently against her knee. The touch broke something in her. She leaned forward, forehead resting on the dog's neck, breathing in dust, fur, and a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. The rancher paused his work, only for a heartbeat, as if the sight of her crumbling into quiet relief struck something deep beneath his ribs. Then he returned to the pot, stirring, waiting, watching without appearing to. Her child stirred again, let out a soft cry. She rushed to the cot on unsteady legs. The quilt fell aside, revealing what the cold had hidden, bruising along the little one's arm. Small, dark, finger-shaped. Her breath froze. Not from cold this time, but from memory. A slow, creeping dread that crawled up her spine with teeth. She pulled the sleeve down gently, kissed the child's temple, swore silently that no one would ever touch her like that again. The rancher's shadow stretched across the floor. He had seen. His jaw tightened the way a storm tightens before it breaks. But still he said nothing. He simply turned back to the stove, lifted the pot, poured soup into a bowl and set it where she could reach. An act of protection without ceremony. An act of defiance against whatever had marked the child. Wind battered the cabin again. Harder, as if something out there knew exactly where she had fled. She shivered. He stoked the fire until it roared, until warmth chased every shadow from the walls, until the room felt claimed. She sat beside her child, Bull beside her, heat flooding her numb fingers. And slowly, very slowly, she allowed herself to believe in the thaw. Morning settled soft over the cabin, the kind of quiet that makes a person listen harder. Warm light pooled across the floorboards. The fire was still alive, embers pulsing like a heartbeat in the grate. She sat on the edge of the cot, smoothing the child's hair, watching color return to her cheeks grain by grain. The warmth felt, but the fear underneath her skin hadn't thawed. Not fully. Behind her, the rancher set another log on the fire. The door creaked slightly in the wind, and a shiver raced through her before she could stop it. He noticed. Of course he did. He moved to the table, lifted her torn coat, turned it slowly in his hands, as if the fabric itself carried truths he needed to read. A folded scrap of paper slipped from the pocket. It fluttered to the floor. She stiffened. Breath caught. But he didn't open it, didn't ask. He simply placed it on the table with quiet care, pushing it toward her side of the wood. Her past. Her choice. Not his to pry into. The fire popped sharply. She jumped. Too loud. Too familiar. Too close to something she'd spent months trying to outrun. The rancher paused at the stove, hand hovering over a tin cup. His eyes flicked to her, steady as an anchor. "Soup's still warm," he said, voice gravel soft. It was the first thing he'd spoken since dawn. She nodded but didn't stand. Her hands had started to shake again, mind drifting to the bruises she traced on her child's arm. The shape. The pressure. The memory behind it. Her gaze dropped to the coat on the table, the scrap of paper with its jagged crease. She forced herself to reach for it, fingers brushing the surface. The warmth of the room couldn't quite chase the cold that rose inside her. She unfolded the paper. A letter, ink smudged, edges torn where she'd ripped it from the rest. His handwriting. The words struck her like ice, promises that curdled into threats, pleas that became commands. Then the final line, sharp, precise, promising he'd come for her. And for the child. Her breath caught. The rancher watched from a distance, expression unreadable. He didn't ask what the letter meant. Didn't he too? The tremor in her hands told the whole story. Outside, a distant hoofbeat echoed across the frozen valley. The sound was faint, but in her chest it landed like a hammer. She turned toward the window. Frost glimmered along the edges, catching the morning sun like shards of glass. No rider appeared, just wind drifting through the pines. But the memory of pursuit wouldn't let her breathe. The rancher stepped forward, slow, purposeful. He lifted the coat again, his fingers brushing over the torn shoulder seam. Then he waited, giving her space to decide whether she wanted him to see more. She swallowed hard, then nodded. He turned the coat inside out. Bruise-colored stains marked the lining where her ribs would have struck, a tear near the collar where a hand might have yanked. Evidence. Physical. Undeniable. A truth too heavy to hide any longer. She wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth of the cabin suddenly not enough. He set the coat down gently, as if placing the wounded thing onto a healer's table. "You two stay here," he said quietly. "I'll fix what I can." Not a promise. Not a speech. A simple statement of fact. He moved to the workbench, pulling thread, leather, and tools from drawers, each item placed with soft clinks that steadied the room. She watched him mend the coat with careful hands, each stitch a silent argument against the world she fled. The fire warmed her back. The threat chilled her bones. Her child stirred under the quilt, letting out a soft sigh as she rolled toward the heat. For the first time, the mother allowed herself to breathe fully. Because now the evidence wasn't hers alone to carry. And she wasn't running alone anymore. The morning stretched gentle and warm, the kind of warmth that felt borrowed from a kinder world. The fire hummed in the hearth, sending ribbons of heat across the room as the rancher tightened the last stitch on her repaired coat. The mother sat close to the cot, spooning broth into her child's mouth, whispering small encouragements between each swallow. The girl's color had returned. Not fully, but enough that the mother's shoulders eased for the first time since Wender swallowed their trail. The rancher rose, rolling his sleeves. He crossed to the door, cracked it open, and tested the air. Cold seeped in like a warning, slipping under his boots and wrapping around his ankles. He shut the door. The latch clicked. She flinched at the sound. He caught the reaction, a slight tightening of her jaw, a breath drawn too fast. He didn't speak, just stoked the fire higher, letting warmth chase the cold from the corners again. The old cattle dog ambled toward the cot, head low, tail giving a measured wag. The child reached high, tiny fingers stretching. The dog pressed its muzzle into her palm as if offering a vow of its own. The girl giggled, a small, fragile sound, like ice cracking under the first touch of spring. The mother blinked hard. Something inside her softened, painful and healing all at once. The rancher set a bucket near the stove. Steam rose as he poured in snow to melt. He reached into a cupboard and pulled out a wooden toy horse, worn, one ear chipped, paint faded. He paused, thumb tracing the chipped ear. A memory flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. Then he placed the toy on the table beside the child. The girl's eyes widened. She grabbed the horse and hugged it to her chest, giggling again. The dog gave a soft bark, the sound low and careful, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Warmth deepened. The cabin felt less like a room and more like a shelter grown from breath and heartbeat. Outside, wind dragged across the roof. Not a howl, a whisper, the reminder of the world hunting for them. The mother froze, listening. The rancher moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to check the tree line. Pines stood motionless. Snow drifted in soft swirls. No rider. No shadow. He let the curtain fall. She exhaled shakily. He went back to work, chopping vegetables, setting a pot on the stove, moving in a rhythm that steadied the air. She felt pulled toward that steadiness. The dog settled beside her, leaning against her knee. A simple weight. A grounding one. The warmth radiating from the animal seeped through her chilled bones. For the first time, She didn't pull away. The rancher ladled stew into 2 bowls. He set one near her, the other near a small chair at the corner of the table. The child held up the toy horse, eyes bright. "Horsey," she whispered. The rancher simply nodded. That was enough. They ate in quiet, the kind of quiet that holds more meaning than noise ever could. Every so often, he looked toward the door, not nervous, just cautious, counting shadows, measuring distance. The mother saw it. She knew that habit. She had lived it. As she finished her stew, the child toddled across the floor, toy horse in hand. The dog followed, guiding her steps with slow patience. The rancher set his bowl aside and knelt to the child's height, offering the wooden horse's missing ear with a soft tap of his finger. "Found him like that," he murmured. The girl nodded solemnly. "Still good," she said. His expression didn't change, but something eased around his eyes. The mother watched, heart tightening painfully. Found family wasn't built in declarations. It was built in moments like these. The fire popped again. She jumped less this time, but the sound still carried a memory. A door slammed. A shout. A hand grabbing her arm. Her breath hitched. The rancher noticed. He stood slowly, crossed to the woodpile, and deliberately chose a smaller log, something that wouldn't snap loud. He set it gently on the fire, let it settle instead of break. Warmth rose in waves, softening the edges of her fear. The child climbed into her lap. The wooden horse pressed between them. The dog curled at their feet like a guardian forged from fur and old devotion. The rancher leaned against the table, arms crossed, watching them without intruding. The room breathed. Heat. Soft. Steady. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the echo of something distant, a faint rhythmic sound, like hooves on packed snow far down the valley. The mother stiffened. The rancher's jaw tightened. He moved to the window, lifted the curtain just enough. The valley lay still. No rider yet, but the sound continued, faint and persistent, like a promise coming closer. He let the curtain fall. Turned toward her. "You're safe here," he said quietly. A simple statement. Not a vow. Not a guarantee. Just a truth he intended to keep with his own hands if he had to. The warmth of the cabin held them close. The cold outside waited. And in the space between those 2 worlds, something fragile and precious began to grow. Warmth drifted through the cabin like a blessing. The stew simmered. The fire breathed. The child played with the wooden horse while the old cattle dog guarded her with quiet devotion. The mother folded freshly dried laundry near the hearth, her fingers taut enough to move without trembling. For a few sacred minutes, the world outside didn't exist. Only the soft shuffle of the rancher's boots as he checked the window latches. Only the warmth rising steadily from the stove. Then the wind shifted. A sharp gust hit the side of the cabin, rattling the shutters like a warning knuckle against bone. The mother froze. The rancher's head lifted. Another gust followed, but this one carried something new. A sound threaded through it, far off, precise, a rhythm. Hoofbeats. Slow. Deliberate. Her heart dropped into her stomach. The rancher crossed the room in 3 purposeful steps, pulling back the curtain only an inch. His breath stayed steady, but his shoulders squared the way a man prepares for something he recognized long before it appears. A rider crested the snowy rise. A fine coat. A well-groomed horse. A posture too comfortable in the cold. The mother's hand rose to her throat. Not him. Please, not him. The rancher let the curtain fall. He turned toward her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The warmth of the cabin seemed to draw back, leaving pockets of cold air around the door, around the windows, around her ribs. The dog growled, a low rumble, like distant thunder. The child looked up, sensing the change. "Mama?" she whispered. The mother forced a smile she didn't feel. Before she could lift her child, a knock sounded. Gentle. Polite. Too polite. The rancher stepped forward and opened the door only halfway. The cold swept in like a sheet of ice. A man stood on the porch. Trim beard. Fur-lined coat. Gloves spotless. Smile warm enough to melt frost if it had been real. "Well now," he said, his voice smooth as oiled wood. "Didn't think I'd find you this far out." The rancher didn't answer. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Bennett. Folks call me Ben." His gaze flicked past the rancher, searching the shadows behind him. Searching for her. She sank back into the corner, pulse trembling. Ben smiled wider. "I'm looking for a woman and her a little girl. Poor thing took off in the storm. Not herself. Real distressed." The rancher filled the doorway with silence. Ben chuckled lightly, as if the moment were nothing more than neighborly conversation. "Saw tracks leading this direction. Thought maybe you'd seen someone." The rancher didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't create a gap big enough for the man's lies to slip through. Wind swirled snow around Ben's boots. The cold dared itself across the threshold but couldn't get past the rancher's stance. Ben leaned in slightly. "Mind if I step inside? Warm up a bit? It's bitter out here." "No." One word. Flat. Final. Ben blinked, surprised. "Oh. Well. Fair enough." His smile remained, but the edges hardened like cooling metal. "Just trying to help. That woman. She's confused. Sickly. Might have imagined a few things." The mother's breath hitched. The rancher heard it. His hand tightened on the door. "She's made some serious accusations," Ben continued smoothly. "Wild ones. Things no man should have to defend himself against." The rancher didn't shift. Didn't yield. Ben cleared his throat, pretending disappointment. "Look. If she's here, you're doing her no favor keeping her hidden. She needs care. She needs stability. She needs me." A memory crashed through her. Hands grabbing her shoulders, fingers digging hard, a voice whispering that she'd never survive without him. Her skin prickled with cold despite the fire's heat. Ben sighed, as if wearing a burden he'd chosen. "Look, friend. If she's not here, then say so. But I'll keep searching. Won't stop. Not until she's safe." Safe. The word twisted in his mouth. The rancher's jaw flexed once. "Ain't seen her." Ben studied him. A long, pointed silence. Then a smile returned, like a mask slipping back into place. "All right then. Appreciate your time." He tipped his hat again, turned his horse, and rode off slow enough to listen, slow enough to let them feel watched. The rancher shut the door. Warmth returned, inch by inch, as the latch slid into place. The mother pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the shaking that threatened to undo her. The rancher approached her, quiet as snowfall. He crouched beside her. "You know him?" Not a question. A fact drawn from the fear etched into her breath. She nodded, tears threatening. "He'll come back." The rancher rose. He checked the lock, checked the windows, checked the rifle hanging above the mantel. Then he stepped between her and the door. His voice was steady, low, unmoved by the cold clawing at the walls. "Then I'll be here when he does." The cold didn't leave after Bennett rode away. It clung to the cabin walls, thinning the warmth, dimming the fire, settling into the mother's bones like old fear waking from shallow sleep. The rancher checked the window again. Curtain lifted. Curtain dropped. His jaw stayed tight, carved from silence and winter stone. The mother sat near the hearth, holding her child close, trying to steady her breath. The dog pressed against her leg, sensing the tremor beneath her skin. For a while, no one spoke. Then, hoofbeats again. Not from the valley this time. From the ridge above. Light. Unhurried. A man approaching who believed the world belonged to him. The rancher moved to the door before the knock came. When he opened it, Bennett stood there smiling, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders like stage props chosen for charm. "Morning," Bennett said warmly. "Didn't want to leave yesterday on such dense footing. Thought we might break the ice proper." The rancher didn't answer. Bennett chuckled, unbothered. "Mind if I come in now? Won't stay long. Just want to clear up a misunderstanding." "No." Bennett blanked, then softened his expression. "Friend, I get it. Man like you. Private. Careful. Respect that. Truly. He leaned casually against the porch rail. How about we talk out here then? The mother tightened her hold on her child, listening from the shadows where Bennett couldn't see her. Bennett lowered his voice. Look, I'll be straight. The woman I'm searching for, she ain't stable. Inside the cabin, her breath hitched so sharply she almost dropped the child. Bennett kept going. She's always been dramatic. Jumps at shadows. Makes up stories when she's upset. The rancher's face didn't change, but his hand slid slightly, resting near the doorframe, blocking the entrance more deliberately. Bennett cleared his throat. You know how some women get. Emotional storms. Delusions. I tried helping her. Tried everything. The rancher's breath cooled in the doorway, rising like steam. Not my business. Bennett smiled gratefully. Exactly. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. He stepped closer. Too close. But if she's here, she could hurt herself. Or the kid. She's not thinking clearly. A tremor raced through the mother's spine. The child felt it and burrowed deeper into her coat. Warmth from the fire flickered uncertainly, as if listening for permission to stay. Bennett took another step. If she came this way, you're doing her no favor keeping her hidden. The rancher didn't move. His silence was an agreement. It was a wall. Bennett studied him with a practiced eye, sensing resistance but misreading its depth. Look, I'll be honest, she said some terrible things about me. Completely untrue. But folks who don't understand her, they might believe her. A gust of wind slammed into the cabin's side. The shutters rattled. The mother closed her eyes as the sound dredged up memories, doors slamming, threats whispered, a hand forcing her into silence. Bennett let out a sorrowful sigh. I just want her safe. That's all. She belongs with me. Everybody knows it. The rancher's eyes narrowed. Barely. But enough. He shifted, blocking more of the opening. Ain't seen her. Bennett's smile thinned. You sure? Sure. A long, cold silence stretched between them. The kind that measures men. Bennett finally nodded, mask slipping back into place. All right. But I'll keep looking. Storm's clearing. Roads will be easier. Harder for someone to hide. He tipped his hat like a gentleman in a painting. Take care, friend. He turned, mounted his horse, rode off at a leisurely pace, one designed to unsettle more than threaten. The rancher closed the door, locked it. The warmth returned in slow waves, crawling back into the room like a timid animal. The mother sat rigid, holding her child so tightly the little one whimpered. The dog nudged her leg, whining quietly. The rancher knelt in front of her, not close enough to startle, close enough to anchor. He's hunting, she whispered. I know. Her eyes brimmed with dread. He'll twist it. He always does. Makes people believe I am the problem. The rancher's voice stayed low, even. A truth grounded in stone. He won't get the chance here. Outside, a distant echo of hoofbeats drifted back, like a promise, or a threat, carried on winter's breath. Inside, the fire grew stronger. The child nestled against her mother's chest. The dog curled between them and the door. And the rancher stood guard, silent as a vow. The cold returned before the sun did. It pressed against the cabin walls, seeping through the smallest cracks, dimming the fire's reach. The rancher rose before dawn, boots whispering against the floorboards as he checked the windows again. His silence was a shield, thick as the logs stacked by the door. The mother woke to the soft scrape of his chair being pulled closer to the entrance. Not for comfort, for readiness. The child stirred in her lap, still clutching the wooden horse, warm breath against her neck. Small, trusting. The mother brushed her daughter's hair aside, but her hand froze halfway, memory striking like cold iron. Bennett's whisper in a dark hallway, his fingers closing around her wrist, the promise that she'd never outrun him. She shut her eyes, steadied herself. The warmth of the cabin pulled her back. By mid-morning, the wind had shifted. Not the wild kind that screamed down the valley, a quieter one. Observing. The rancher stepped outside just long enough to check the sky. Frost-laced air wrapped around him like a warning. When he returned, his jaw was set. "Tracks," he said simply. Her pulse snapped. "Fresh?" He nodded once. The fire popped. Too sharp. Too sudden. The mother flinched before she could stop herself. The rancher didn't comment. He simply fed the flames a smaller log, something that wouldn't explode or echo. Warmth rose again, filling the room with a steady glow. Then, hoofbeats. Not distant this time. Not wandering. Coming straight for them. The child pressed into her mother's chest. The dog growled low, body rigid, ears pointed toward the door. The rancher's hand dropped to the rifle propped beside the hearth. He didn't raise it. Didn't brandish it. Just let his fingers rest on the wood. A calm gesture. A dangerous one. A shadow moved past the frosted window. Slow. Deliberate. Then the knock. Harder than the day before. The rancher opened the door just enough to fill it with his frame. Bennett stood there, breath fogging in the cold. Snow clung to his lashes like glitter misplaced. His smile was gone. "Morning," Bennett said, voice clipped. "We need to talk." The rancher didn't budge. Bennett's slid over the rancher's shoulder. "I've spoken with the deputy. Told him about her condition. Her confusion." The mother stiffened. The word condition dug into her like a blade. Bennett continued, calm dripping like poison in warm tea. "He's worried. So I'm responsible for her, you understand? Legally. Morally." The rancher's breath steamed from his nose, slow, controlled. Bennett leaned in slightly. "And that child of hers? She's not safe out here. This is no place for instability." The dog barked sharply. The rancher did not flinch. "You should leave," he said. Just 3 words, heavy as iron. Bennett's eyebrows rose. "Friend, I'm offering you the chance to do the right thing." "No." Bennett blinked. "No? You heard me." The air tightened, cold squeezing into the space between them. Bennett chuckled. Not kindly. "Look, I know what she told you. But she lies when she's scared. Makes up stories. Wild ones. Claims I hurt her. Claims I hurt the kid." The mother's throat locked. Her child whimpered. The rancher didn't look back. Didn't he too? "You need to leave," he repeated. Bennett's smile cracked. "You're making a mistake." The rancher didn't answer. He simply shifted his stance, boots rooted, shoulders squared. Enough force in the posture alone to say he'd move only when the earth did. A gust of wind slammed into the cabin's side. Snow spiraled across the porch. Bennett stepped back, startled by the sudden bite of cold. He recovered quickly, adjusting his gloves. "You don't know her like I do. You don't know what she's capable of." The rancher's hand slid along the rifle's stock, not lifting it, just reminding the world he had won. "I know enough," he said quietly. Bennett's eyes narrowed. A predator recognizing another wallet couldn't charm its way through. "You really want to stand between me and what's mine?" Bennett asked. "She ain't yours." The words landed like an axe splitting winter wood. A long silence devoured the porch. Bennett inhaled, slow and venomous. "This isn't the end. I'll be back. With law on my side." The rancher didn't blink. "Then I'll be here." Bennett turned sharply, boots crunching against the snow. He mounted his horse, jaw clenched, eyes burning with quiet fury. As he rode off, his voice drifted back on the wind. "Hope you're ready to answer for this." The rancher shut the door. The lock clicked. Warmth seeped back into the room, but the cold lingered like a scar freshly reopened. The mother held her child close, tears burning but unfallen. The dog laid itself between them and the door, refusing to move. The rancher stepped forward, breath still steady, presence still immovable. "You're safe," he said. Not a promise. A stance. A stand. The storm returned that night. Snow drifted sideways past the windows, brushing the cabin in long, cold strokes. The fire crackled hard, throwing heat that never seemed to reach the deepest corners of the room. The rancher sat at the table sharpening a knife slowly, the scrape whispering through the silence. The mother rocked her child before the hearth, but even the warmth of the flames couldn't steady the trembling in her limbs. The dog lay between them and the door, chin on its paws, ears twitching at sounds the humans couldn't hear. Every creak of the cabin made her flinch. Every gust on the roof made her heart stutter. The rancher set the knife down. He'll come. She closed her eyes. I know. Morning arrived colorless, heavy with dread. The wind died, leaving the world disturbingly still. That unnatural quiet, like a predator holding its breath, settled into the floorboards. She fed the child a thin broth. Her hands shook so badly the spoon tapped against the edge of the cup. The rancher pulled on his coat and stepped onto the porch. She heard the crunch of snow under his boots, the pause, the soft click of him checking the rifle's chamber. Then, another sound. Another set of footsteps. Not his. He returned inside before she could stand. Riders. Her knees nearly buckled. How many? She whispered. 2. The dog growled, low and deep. A shadow slid past the frosted window. Then another. The rancher placed himself between the door and the family without thinking. His body a wall. His breath steady. His stance carved out of pure refusal. A knock, sharp, official. Open up. The voice wasn't Bennett's. It was heavier. Authority wrapped in cold iron. The rancher opened the door just enough. A deputy stood there, snow on his hat, badge shining in the gray morning light. Bannard hovered behind him, coat pristine, expression carved into carefully practiced worry. Morning, the deputy said, voice crisp. Got a report of a missing woman and child. Man here says he thinks they came this way. The mother's pulse slammed against her ribs. She couldn't step forward, couldn't hide, could only cling to her child as the warmth drained from her fingers. The rancher kept his voice steady. House is occupied. By who? Me. Bennett leaned sideways, trying to peer past the rancher. She's frightened of strangers, sheriff. Might be hiding. Her stomach twisted. The deputy frowned. Mind if I look inside? Law says I gotta check. No. The deputy stiffened. You're refusing a lawful search? She's safe. The deputy glanced at Bennett, who put on an expression dripping with wounded concern. She's not well, Bennett said softly. She gets confused. Thinks people mean her harm. The mother shuddered. The words were old shackles. Too familiar. The deputy cleared his throat. Sir, if you've got nothing to hide, step aside. The rancher didn't move. Not an inch. I won't let you take her. The deputy's hand drifted to his holster. This isn't optional. A gust of wind slammed the cabin wall. Snow sifted down from the rafters. The child whimpered. The rancher's breath came slow and controlled. She told the truth. The deputy hesitated. Truth about what? Before the rancher could answer, Bennett stepped forward. Wild accusations. Things she imagined when she was upset. I've cared for her for years. Ask anyone in town. The mother's vision blurred. Her throat closed. Her voice refused to rise. The rancher looked back at her, just once. A silent question. A chance to speak. Her lips parted. Nothing came. The memory of Bennett's threat smothered every word. The deputy saw her silence. He made the wrong conclusion. He holstered his gun and stepped onto the porch. Ma'am, you come with us now. For your own safety. She shook her head violently, but still no sound left her. The rancher stepped forward. She stays. The deputy's jaw tightened. Move. No. Bennett's smile returned, small, victorious. She's coming home, he said softly. She always does. The mother squeezed her child close. Tears slid hot down her cheeks. Because for the first time since fleeing into the storm, the warmth in the cabin couldn't reach her. The Long had chosen wrong. And the man who had vowed to stand between her and danger was now outnumbered. 1 rifle, 2 armed men, and a lie polished to perfection. The deputy stepped inside. Bennett followed. Cold poured in behind them like a tide swallowing the last safe place she had left. And the rancher stood alone, shoulders squared, breath steady, facing a storm no fire could melt. The town hall smelled of stove heat and winter coats. People packed the benches shoulder to shoulder. Boots melted snow onto the floorboards. The iron stove in the corner glowed a dull red, fighting off the cold that seeped through the windows. The mother sat near the back, child in her lap, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. The rancher sat beside her, solid, unmoving, a stillness carved from granite. Bennett stood at the front, polished boots, fresh shape, coat pressed sharp as a blade. He played concerned husband well, too well. "I just want her safe," he said, voice smooth enough to glide across eyes. "She's been confused for months, seeing threats where there aren't any." Several townsfolk murmured in sympathy. The mother lowered her gaze. Heat from the stove brushed her cheek. She didn't feel it. Her body held nothing but cold. The deputy stood next to Bennett, arms folded. "We found her hiding out at his cabin," he told the room. "Man had no right keeping her there." More murmurs, a few nods. The rancher kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, breathing controlled. "And," Bennett added, lowering his voice to a sorrowful hush, "she made claims, wild ones, about me hurting her, hurting the child. Folks, I love them. I'd never." He let the silence hung like a noose. The mother felt the room tilt, not physically, but in allegiance. Warmth. Cold. Warmth. Cold. Her heart lurched between both. The mayor turned to her. "Ma'am, if there's something you want to say." Her throat closed. Her child whimpered softly, burying her face in her mother's coat. The mother's breath quickened. A memory crashed through her. The slam of a door, Bennett's hand bruising her arm, his voice threatening that no one would believe her anyway. The cold inside her grew. The room began leading Bennett's way, a tide shifting. Bennett placed a hand over his heart. "I just want to bring my family home." The rancher shifted, a small motion but enough to anchor her. The mayor frowned. "Unless there's proof, sir, it's her word against yours." Proof. The word cracked the air. A spark. A possibility. The rancher stood. Without asking permission. Without delivering a speech. Without giving the room time to prepare. He reached into his coat and pulled out her torn garment, the one he had repaired by firelight. He laid it on the table, turned it so the lining faced up. The room leaned forward. Inside the lining, faint stains. Bruise-colored smudges where her ribs had struck. A tear near the collar where someone had yanked her. The mayor squinted. "What's that?" The rancher tapped the torn seam. "Damage. Not from falling, from hands." A ripple went through the crowd. Bennett's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. The rancher wasn't finished. He set down a folded slip of paper. The mother's breath caught. The letter. The threat disguised as affection. The mayor unfolded it. "Read it silently first, then aloud." His voice hardening with each line. "You'll come home when I say. You'll learn what happens when you make me look bad. The girl listens better when she's scared." The last line landed like a hammer. A gasp shot through the room. A woman near the front pressed a hand to her mouth. A storekeeper shook his head slowly. He'd always thought Bennett too smooth. The mother's breath quickened, but it wasn't fear this time. It was air returning to lungs long starved. The mayor looked up, jaw clenched. "Bennett, care to explain this?" Bennett forced a laugh. "That letter's taken out of context. I'll come for you before spring thaw?" The mayor read again. "That clear enough for me?" Bennett stepped forward, voice rising. "She wrote that. She forged it." The rancher's eyes darkened. "Thinks same as yours." A man on the back stood. "I saw him buying those envelopes at my shop." A woman beside him whispered. "She came in last month holding that bruise on her cheek. Said she fell. But she was shaken." Another voice. "He yelled at her in the street the day she vanished." A tide shifted. Slow. Heavy. Irreversible. Bennett's face tightened. Listen to yourselves. She's manipulating you. Then the child lifted her head. Her small voice pierced the room. He grabbed Mama. Silence tore through the hall. Every head turned. The child clung to her mother's coat, tears gathering in her lashes. He hurt Mama. He hurt me. The mother held her close. Warmth radiated between them, a warmth that finally reached her bones. The mayor stood straighter. Deputy, take Bennett outside. Bennett's composure shattered. This is a setup. She's lying. The deputy grabbed his arm. Bennett jerked away. You idiots. She belongs with me. The rancher took a single step forward. Cold hissed through the open doorway behind Bennett. Warmth pulsed from the stove behind the mother. Between those two worlds, Bennett realized he had lost the middle ground forever. The deputy forced him toward the exit. Townsfolk rose from their seats, some angry, some ashamed, some relieved they finally saw the truth. As Bennett was dragged through the door, the wind swallowed his protests. Snow spattered his boots. The cold reclaimed him. Inside, warmth swept back into the room like breath returning after drowning. The mother clutched her child. Tears fell, but they weren't from fear anymore. The renter lowered himself beside her. Not touching, just close enough that she felt anchored. The mayor cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you're willing, the town will stand with you. We'll see justice done. Justice. The word felt foreign. Denver. Dangerous. The mother exhaled, a deep, shaking release. I'm willing, she whispered. The rancher nodded once. The stove crackled. Warmth rose. Cold withdrew. And for the first time since the storm, she felt the room tilt toward her. Toward truth. Toward safety. Toward home. Spring pushed its first warm breath across the valley the morning Bennett was led out of town for the last time. Snow still clung to the shaded edges of the hills, but the sun had broken through, soft and gold, loosening winter's grip one quiet inch at a time. The rancher walked beside the mother as she carried her child through the thawing field. The grass beneath the melting snow glistened like a promise slowly revealed. She kept glancing behind her. Not because she expected Bennett to return, he was gone, locked away where lies finally failed him. But because memory still had a habit of walking a few steps behind her. The rancher noticed. Without a word, he stepped half a pace closer. Not touching. Just near. An anchor placed exactly where her fear liked to breathe. The child toddled ahead, wooden horse bouncing in her hand. The cattle dog followed protectively, tail swaying in lazy loops. Warm wind brushed her face. She tasted the first hint of safety. A thin line of smoke drifted from the cabin chimney as they approached. A clean, steady plume. Not frantic. Not desperate. Just a home announcing itself to spring. At the cabin, spring light spilled across the porch. The boards had been scrubbed. Tools hung neatly. A new coat of oil darkened the wood railings, catching sunlight in quiet flashes. She paused at the threshold. The last time she'd crossed it, she'd been carried, half frozen, half conscious, wholly terrified. Now she stepped in on her own feet. Warmth greeted her. Not just firelight. Not just heat. Presence. Stillness. Welcome. The rancher set a basket of provisions on the table, rice, flour, dried apples left by townswomen who quietly chose her side. The mother brushed her hand across the table's surface, remembering the night she trembled here, unable to speak. Now her hand was steady. The child clambered onto the rancher's knee, holding out the wooden horse proudly. Fixed his tail, she announced. He gave a small nod, the kind that meant everything. The mother watched the moment unfold. The warmth of it. The quiet normalcy she once thought she'd never feel again. But memory had teeth. A sudden gust battered the window. Her heart lurched. Breath stilled. The rancher saw her flinch. He rose, walked to the door, and opened it wide, letting her see the valley. The empty road. The open sky. No one's coming, he said softly. Warm air drifted through the doorway. Spring birdsong rose from the pine line. She nodded, tears gathering but refusing to fall. He waited, letting her breathe until her shoulders lowered again. The child tugged her skirt. "Mama, look. Puppy sleeping on my toes." She laughed, small, startled, real. Warmth spread through her chest like the first light reaching deep snow. The day continued. Unhurried. Scene by scene. Gentle purpose guiding each moment. She swept the floor. He repaired a loose hinge. The child fed scraps to the dog. Coffee brewed on the stove, filling the cabin with a scent that curled around her like a wool blanket. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Warmth lived in the spaces between movements. In the unspoken ways people began building a life without quite noticing. As the morning carried forward, she opened the shutters and let sunlight pour across the room. Dust motes rose in golden beams. Drifting. Turning. Weightless spirits set free from winter's hold. For a long moment, she simply watched them. Light. Movement. Peace. The child rolled on the rug with the dog, giggling as the old hound accepted her clumsy affection. The rancher chopped wood outside. Each clean strike echoed through the valley. A rhythm. Steady. Assured. A sound that said, "I'm here." A sound that said, "You're safe." Still, every few minutes, she glanced toward the road. Habit. Reflex. Echo. Each time, her heart braced. Each time, she didn't see his shadow, her heart loosened. By early afternoon, she stepped outside to gather water from the well. The air was crisp, but no longer sharp. The earth softening underfoot. She felt the sun on her face. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like something she had to chase or flee. Just something she could stand in. A shadow fell across the path. Her breath caught. Old reflex. But it was only the rancher. Coming to help. He took the bucket from her hands with a quiet nod. No speech. No explanation. Just one more act of steady presence from a man who spoke in actions rather than promises. They walked back to the cabin side by side. Their steps matched without effort, as if their rhythms had been waiting for each other. Inside, the child napped curled against the dog. Their breaths rose and fell in unison. The rancher paused in the doorway, watching them. Something softened in him. A tenderness slipping through the ribs of a man who rarely let himself feel such things. The mother noticed. Something softened in her too. The afternoon drifted slow. She folded blankets. He mended a small tear in the child's dress, his big hands surprisingly careful. Outside, meltwater trickled down the ravine, weaving a silver path through the thaw. Spring was not only arriving. It was settling in. Claiming space. The mother stepped onto the porch and breathed deep. Earth. Pine. Damp bark warming in the sun. She closed her eyes. Stillness wrapped her like a new skin. A sound pulled her from the quiet, a wagon in the distance. Her pulse spiked. But when she looked, it was Mrs. Halpern from town, bringing bread and a jar of peach preserves. The older woman waved from the seat, face open and kind. The mother stiffened anyway. Old habits. Old warning bells. Old scars. Mrs. Halpern didn't approach the porch. Stopped 10 yards short. Lifted the basket with both hands, offering it without crossing a boundary. A choice spoken without words. "I'll set it here," she called. "You take what you need. No prying questions. No sideways glances. No sympathy sharpened into pity. Just support placed gently on the ground." The rancher nodded from behind the mother. The woman drove off. No one else came. No glockers. No whispers. No judgments drifting up the hill. The valley held its peace. Slowly, bit by bit, she let herself believe the quiet might last. As evening painted the sky in amber and ash rose, they sat together on the porch. The child curled between them. The dog sprawled at their feet, a blanket draped across their legs, holding the day's warmth a little longer. The valley shimmered in the dying light. Tiny streams carved fresh paths through the thaw, catching the sun like threads of liquid fire. The mother watched the water run. She felt something similar loosened inside her. The rancher cleared his throat. "Cabin's yours as long as you need." She kept her eyes on the horizon. "We've already taken too much." He shook his head. "It ain't taken when it's given." Silence. Soft. Expansive. Comfortable. She glanced at the cabin behind them. The porch beneath her feet. The child leaning warm against her. The man who had stood between her and darkness without demanding anything in return. Home was no longer a structure she hoped to reach. It was a presence. A steadiness. A person. She slid her hand across the bench until it brushed his. Barely touching. Barely there. He didn't pull away. Warmth pulsed between them, small, steady, unmistakably alive. A beginning. A promise. A vow without ceremony. Night gathered around the valley in slow folds. Stars pricked through the deepening blue. The rancher rose, lit the lantern, and hung it on the porch beam. A small beacon. A quiet declaration. There is light here. Stay. Inside, he stirred the fire, coaxing flames from the coals. The mother laid out supper, simple fare, warmed through. The child rubbed sleep from her eyes and climbed onto her mother's lap. No fear in her face. No tension. Just the easy trust of a child who finally felt safe. The mother kissed her hair. A gesture she'd once performed with trembling hands. Now she did it without thinking. The rancher watched from the stove. Something moved behind his eyes. A recognition. A longing. A soft astonishment at what had taken root in his home. They ate together. Slow. Quiet. Content. Steam curled upward from their bowls. The fire cracked softly. The dog snored in a low, comforting rumble. Everything in the cabin felt newly claimed, newly alive, newly theirs. After supper, she washed dishes while he dried them. Their movements mirrored one another. A practice dance formed long before either realized it was happening. The child stacked her blocks on the floor. Every now and then, she looked up just to make sure the grown-ups were still there. Still close. Still calm. Each time she found them exactly as she hoped. Her shoulders dropped a little more. Her play grew a little bolder. The mother watched her daughter with a swell of gratitude that made her breath hitch. Not from sorrow. Not from fear. From relief. Pure and unadorned. When the dishes were put away, the rancher checked the door latch. Not out of paranoia. Out of habit shaped by care. She noticed the small detail. The simple protection. Her throat tightened. She stepped closer. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. Didn't look at her. Didn't need to. The gratitude hung between them like a warm lantern glow. The child grew sleepy, rubbing her eyes. The mother scooped her up. The rancher followed them to the small sleeping nook he'd prepared months earlier. A cot. A quilt. A little shelf for her wooden toys. He paused in the doorway as the mother lowered the child onto the soft bedding. The little girl clutched the wooden horse. Breath deepening. Muscles loosening. Safe. Finally safe. The mother smoothed her daughter's hair. Her hand lingered. She whispered something soft and private, words carried only to the small ear nestled against the pillow. When she stood, she found the rancher still there. Still quiet. Still watching with a reverence he tried to hide. They stepped back into the main room. The fire had settled into a low, steady glow. The rancher poured 2 cups of warm tea. Set one in front of her. No flourish. Just a simple care offered at the right moment. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Heat seeped into her palms. Into her bones. Into old wounds she no longer wished to carry. He sat across from her. The distance between them felt smaller than it had that morning. He sipped once, cleared his throat. "Tomorrow," he said, "we can mend the fence line, if you want to come along." She blinked. A small invitation. Ordinary. Domestic. Exactly the kind of future she once believed she'd forfeited. "I'd like that," she said. Her voice didn't shake. He nodded. Satisfied. Outside, the wind wrestled through the pines, soft, warm, almost playful. The valley exhaled. So did she. Night deepened. The fire faded to a red heartbeat. The rancher stood. Tended the embers. Checked the windows. Made one last pass around the room as if to ensure the world stayed outside where it belonged. When he reached the door, he paused. Looked back at her. A quiet moment. A quiet choice. "You rest," he said. "I'm right here." The words drifted across the cabin like the final stroke of a brush. Steady. Assuring. True. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She felt the safety in her bones. In her breath. In the way the darkness no longer pressed inward. She rose from the table. Walked past him to her small room off the main hallway. Paused in the doorway. Looked back. He met her gaze. Held it. Something passed between them. Something simple. Human. Steady as spring taking hold. She whispered, "Good night." He tipped his head. Night. She stepped inside and closed the door. Not to shut him out. To rest knowing he was there. Watching. Protecting. Holding the line no one else ever had. She lay down beside her child. Listened to her daughter's peaceful breath. Listened to the soft murmur of the rancher settling into his chair by the fire. Listened to the valley, quiet, safe, hers again. Then she closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. And spring settled deeper into the home they were learning to build together. Not out of need. Not out of desperation. But out of choice. Out of earned trust. Out of love that didn't rush or demand or blaze. But warmed. Slowly, steadily. Like a hearth tended by patient hands. The sanctuary had begun. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.